You're listening to the Australian Hunting and Beyond podcast with Matt, where we talk about hunting, shooting, fishing, camping, and everything else that the great outdoors has to offer. Let's get into it.
All right, a different episode tonight. It's just me, no guest, and I'm diving into the Conservation Hunting Bill 2025. It's some controversial legislation that just hit the floor of New South Wales Parliament and is now headed to an inquiry. So before we start, if you do like the episode, make sure that you hit that like and subscribe button, and I'd love it if you shared your thoughts in the comment section on YouTube and Spotify. All right. At first glance, this bill sounds great. Something I know I've been calling for a few of these things to happen on the show for a long time. Who wouldn't agree on a plan to involve hunters in the fight against feral pests like pigs and foxes, whilst also managing game population numbers for deer? Well, plenty of people seems like they are against this, and we are going to cover who. So the bill would aim to create a new statutory body called the Conservation Hunting Authority. This would formally recognise hunting as a tool for environmental protection and even introduce bounties for invasive species. The bill was introduced by the Honourable Robert Borsak of the Shooters, Fishers, Farmers Party, and surprisingly, or perhaps not, it got the backing of the Minns Labor government. That alone raised a lot of eyebrows and was met with a lot of questions regarding other legislation that was on the table, as references were made to a dirty deal on compensation, which Mark Banasiak, who is also SFFP, condemned in his speech. But there has been plenty of backlash regarding the support coming from a range of people, including scientists, conservationists, and political rivals alike. With that pressure mounting and the numbers changing from what Mr. Borsak thought was in support of the bill, it has now been referred to an upper house inquiry. That means that public submissions, expert testimony, and a whole lot of scrutiny is about to occur. But is this a bad thing? Well, let's break down why or why not. So firstly, for me, the science really doesn't stack up. And this is where we talk about our friends over at the Invasive Species Council, who are loosely acknowledged as Australia's leading authority on managing pest animals. Well, they say this bill is based on what's called a biological delusion, that their research shows that recreational hunters are simply not effective at controlling feral species. They do leave out they are anti-firearms, and they like to point fingers at inefficiency and welfare concerns. I'm guessing that they've never seen any animals die from 1080 poison, and that they love to push that so much as one of their main solutions. I don't know how that is ethical. I read a stat that for every hunting license issued, the average number of feral animals killed is 0.7. That's less than one animal per hunter. Now, that number is absolute rubbish, and I'll explain why. And this is coming from them. Firstly, how is the data collected? Without getting all the information, I predict that they are using R-license data. Now, the R-license system is for hunters to report on what they harvest or shoot in New South Wales. It's only public land. So this fails to account for property owners and the vast array of shooters, farmers, hunters that kill pests, as there is no system that collects that data. So a comparable analogy for this would be saying, like, let's look at speeding drivers, but only on freeways and motorways above 100 kilometers an hour. And the rest of that data, we're just going to discount. We're not going to worry about any other road. It sounds ridiculous, right? Well, that's because it is. The next thing they like to say is that recreational hunting tends to target the wrong animals in the wrong places at the wrong times with no coordination. Effective pest management, they argue, comes from professional, large-scale methods of baiting, trapping, and aerial shooting, not from what they refer to as ad hoc bush weekends. I personally find this very laughable because we've all seen the data from aerial shooting. It's a massive cost to the taxpayer, and the numbers harvested aren't as big as you'd actually think. Additionally, what happens to the animals that are shot? Well, you guessed it, they stay on the deck. Other pest animals eat them. It's a food source that is readily available, And doesn't that increase population numbers? So now they do want to push baiting, and they say this is because it is targeted. But they also say that as hunters, we are not targeting the right animals. Baiting targets everything, including animals that potentially aren't the target species. That's a problem in my eyes. Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't use all these measures to manage animals, but saying hunters had limited to zero impact is delusional. And I believe it's a money grab. So, does the ISC or Invasive Species Council, do they get funding from the government? Well, the answer from my research is yes, they do. The ISC received financial grants from the Australian government, although such funding constitutes a relatively small portion of its overall budget. But an example of this was they secured a $700,000 federal grant recently this year, and that was targeted for trout to look after native fish species. Now, again, I'm not against this. Let's make that very clear. However, if there's money involved and people's employment, I do think there is definitely bias. And the same could be argued for us as hunters. So while the ISC does receive those government grants for projects, there is other funding that comes from a variety of areas. And it is deemed that they're trying to wipe out all invasive species. I don't think this is personally going to happen. It is one of those things that I don't think any of the invasive species that are now here will ever get wiped out. But if your goal, like the ISC is to wipe out invasive species, why are they against hunters helping? I just don't understand this. Any animal removed is a win, isn't it? But from their perspective, it's not. That does not make any sense. So there's a saying that says, follow the money. Well, I'm just saying this might be a key reason here. Additionally to this, I'd like to mention the great work that the Australian Pig Doggers and Hunters Association, the APDHA, have done recently on their study on removing pigs in Queensland. According to them, pig hunters are removing approximately 35,000 feral pigs each week. This figure is based on data collected through the APDHA's Great Australian Pig Hunt Initiative, which tracks pig control efforts across Australia. In 2024, the APDHA reported that hunters nationwide eradicated over 5.38 million feral pigs, with Queensland contributing significantly to this total. The association emphasises that these efforts not only help the control of the feral pig populations, but also contribute to the economy, with hunters spending an estimated $326.88 million per year on pig hunting activities alone. Now, I am not an expert mathematician, but those numbers compared to the amount of hunters that we have, well, that contradicts what the ISC is saying about 0.7 animals per hunter per year. Doesn't make sense. And can I also say that Queensland has a no public land hunting model? So all the animals that are being removed from the landscape, it's happening on private land with permission from farmers, and not every farmer allows people to shoot on their property. So let's jump over to the Animal Justice Party, and we know that they're not pulling punches when it comes to hunting. MLC Emma Hurst says this bill gives a fringe minority of men a blank check to kill under the banner of conservation. One of her major concerns is it opens up 50,000 hectares of public land, forests, reserves, even Crown land to more shooting. And let's be clear, this isn't just about access, she feels. This bill would give hunting groups significant influence over the new Conservation Hunting Authority, effectively placing hunters in the driver's seat for decisions about public land use. So opponents like the AJP and the Greens, they mentioned that this smells like the return of the Game Council. And that was a body that was scrapped in 2013 after a scathing review found major governance failures. So I think it's prevalent that we dive into what was the New South Wales Game Council. So it was a statutory authority that was established in 2002 under the Game and Feral Animal Control Act 2002. Its purpose was to regulate licensed hunting of game and feral animals on both public and private land, and to promote hunting as a form of pest management here in New South Wales. Sounds great, doesn't it? Well, there was some good things. So the purpose and the role of the council was One, licensing hunters. It issued hunting licenses, regulated species control for both feral animals and game species. It managed public land access, so it coordinated access with state forests on crown lands for licensed hunters, and that was targeting invasive species control. And it promoted hunting, which was also a positive thing. It was advocating for recreational hunters, working with shooting groups and hunting organizations. I don't see any issue with these things. Now, the problem was it was disbanded, and this is what happened. So in 2013, it was disbanded after a really bad governance review, and there was a lot of controversy. One, the governance failures. An independent review by the former New South Wales Police Assistant Commissioner Steve Dunn found that there were serious flaws in the council's governance structure. There was no clear separation between its regulatory role and its advocacy for hunting, a major conflict of interest. You might be sitting there thinking, does that sound like the RSPCA? But hey, let's continue. The poor oversight and risk management. The review found the Game Council had insufficient oversight over who was hunting and where. There was concerns about public safety, particularly in forests and areas where hikers, campers, and others might be unaware of hunting activity. New South Wales has the best safety record out of any, with 0 issues in over 20 years in state forests. Interesting. And some ethical and legal breaches. One of the Game Council's senior members was allegedly involved in illegal hunting activities, further damaging credibility. Now, look, this is unfortunately not. It's a shame that because of one individual's actions, everybody gets brought down. But we know that happens, and it consistently happens with hunters and poachers alike, which you know my opinion of poachers. All right, so the aftermath is it was officially abolished. It was then handed over to the DPI, who have done a fantastic job through their games licensing unit. This is not a bad thing, but the relevance to today is that according to opponents of this new hunting bill is that the Game Council is just, it's going to be Game Council 2.0. The critics warn of that, and they're really concerned that that's going to happen. Now, let's talk about jumping away from that for a second and another part of the bill, which is bounties. I like the bounty system. I've called for it for a while. This is where hunters would be paid to kill feral cats, pigs, foxes, whatever it might be. And it's a great idea. They say it's a dangerous one. I'm unsure how, just because there is an incentive on it for people to keep these animals, that the safety goes out the window. But okay, let's explore that. Apparently, bounty systems have a global track record of failure. They incentivize fraud, encourage cruel practices, and they don't reduce pest populations in the long term. This is super interesting because we'll cover a few of these parts in the second as we go through this. So here's a breakdown of the system. A bounty system pays individuals a fixed amount for each target species killed, and it requires proof like a scalp or a tail, or maybe photos. The goal of this is to reduce pest populations by offering a financial incentive. We currently have some here. In New South Wales, we don't. So the current bill is proposing this. So let's talk about why bounties for foxes are a good thing. Well, it engages public in pest control. Bounties mobilise a large number of individuals who may not target that pest animal. They are particularly useful in remote or private areas where government programs don't reach. Some success stories have already occurred. Victoria had a fox bounty, and they've reportedly killed over 1 million foxes in 2022 when it came back. Local farmers and shooters widely support the program and really feel it complemented their existing control efforts. It motivates ongoing pressure. Foxes are adaptable. They reproduce quickly. A bounty can sustain ongoing hunting pressure where government programs might not. Now, this may also be something that you're sitting here going, aerial culling, animals left on the landscape as a food source. Do foxes eat the deer that are shot? Well, you'd be right in saying yes, they do. Isn't that like counterintuitive to what's being argued? And also, they're saying it is also a cost-effective supplemental strategy. Governments, by putting in a bounty system, it's a cheaper add-on than more intensive pest management strategies and is going to cost far less. Now, the arguments against bounties, and this is, look, again, I don't particularly agree with these, but we'll talk about them anyway. Is that in Australia, they say bounties rarely reduce overall fox numbers. The fox populations often rebound quicker due to high reproductive rates, and then they migrate from surrounding areas. But wouldn't that be the same for aerial hunting or 1080 baiting when new animals just come in? Anyway, let's continue. A 2009 New South Wales DPI report noted that shooting alone is ineffective for controlling fox populations in the long term. Bounty schemes give an illusion of success while failing to address the ecological problem. Or again, we talk about 1080 poison. We talk about extra food from aerial culling. I think hunters shooting animals and taking the meat off the landscape is doing a better job than some of these other versions. Another key concern is fraud and rorting. So bounty programs have seen fraudulent claims. I'm guaranteed this has happened, like tails from the same fox being submitted multiple times or tails killed outside the bounty area. Now, my concern with the latter is that if you've got an animal that's been killed outside the bounty area, isn't that still removing a fox from the landscape, which is a positive thing? It doesn't make sense as to why that's an issue. Yes, I have major issue with someone using the same animal to claim multiple bounties. That's a problem. That could be easily fixed, especially with the use of AI or different structures in place now. Policing this requires substantial administrative overhead. Now, I disagree with AI and technology being so great nowadays. These are things that can definitely be fixed. There is a system out there that could do this with minimal admin personnel and have a positive effect. Now, this one's a bit far-fetched for me because apparently it disrupts professional control. So bounties may undermine coordinated efforts like poison baiting, which are more effective but less visible to the public. I'm unsure how a shooter in an area that, if we're so poor at doing the job, is that we're going to scare a fox off from eating 1080 bait when we're there for a small amount of time, is what they argue. That doesn't make sense. The fox will just return when people are gone and it will feed like normal. I don't understand that. Recreational hunters may also avoid areas under baiting programs to preserve live targets for later bounty collection. I don't understand what they're saying in this sense. Is that, are they going to try and go and find a dead baited animal to collect the bounty? Hey, look, maybe that could happen. Doubt it. And if you're avoiding areas for baiting to shoot elsewhere, isn't that a win? So I know the R license system does a fantastic job of this, is that they say where 1080 baiting occurs in that state forest. It's on the maps that you've got to use. So if you're there to target foxes for a bounty, you're going to stay out of those areas because you want to shoot something. Yeah, I'm unsure. It also talks about ethical and animal welfare considerations. Bounty incentives apparently encourage inhumane killing methods, particularly when individuals prioritize speed or quantity over welfare. Have they not heard of 1080? I'm just curious here because that slow, painful poisoning death is, I'm just confused how that's not inhumane. Maybe I got this wrong. Lack of regulation in remote areas can increase risks of non-target species or wounding other animals. Again, we're back to 1080, where people have lost their pet dogs and stock dogs. That, again, does not make sense to me. There's no targeting of breeding females. If there's a bounty population, if someone sees a fox, they're going to shoot the fox. I don't think they're going to check to see what it identifies as. Random removal does not necessarily reduce that reproductive capacity of fox populations. Again, we'll go to 1080. Apparently, bounty-driven killing is opportunistic and not strategic. I would love someone to explain the strategic placement of 1080 to only go after female foxes, because I don't know how that occurs. Maybe they gender stereotyping and the baits are pink to attract the girls. I don't know. So there is a lot of this evidence-based, and I use that term very lightly for this consensus, that apparently that strategic 1080 baiting is the best way to go to control efforts. I'm not so sure, and well, we just broke down. why. So this bill also calls for the right to hunt. And this was, look, I think that's great. However, I don't think it's worded great. And I agree with Dan from Shawmac Industries, who posted about this on Facebook. And he made some very valid points that I'm about to explain to you. So the first one he said was the bill is being advocated as establishing a right to hunt, but does it actually achieve this? He notes with interest that there's three core objects of the Act, and they actually do not establish a right to hunt, nor do they even use the words right. So Section 4A, and in brackets 1, does instill a resemblance of a right. However, that's quickly dismissed by 4A2 in brackets, where it says an individual's right to hunt is not absolute. Well, which is it? Is it a right to hunt? Or it can be taken away. That's not a right. It advocates that we need to use land managers. They must consider a person's right to hunt. It's an obligation for land managers in 4B. But then on 4B1, uses wording like a land manager may consult. And then more directly and critically in 4C, A and B, outlines the land manager does not have to consider a right to hunt. They're sort of very contradictory. So which is it? So the other thing in this bill is the use of suppressors. And unfortunately, I don't think this is going to ever get ahead here. And that is because they're a prohibited item. Just because it's into the bill doesn't mean that the legislation will change. And I don't think this is a short-term solution for that. And I don't think this bill will actually rectify it. I do actually think this was thrown into the bill as a bargaining chip to be one of the strikeouts and be removed. And it's already been said by the two major parties, Liberal and Labor, that they would not support the bill with the use of suppressors in there. So it's sort of like it's in there, but not. I'd like to argue why national parks aren't in there, but let's keep going with this for a little bit. So the bill has now been sent to this parliamentary inquiry. That's probably because of pressure from the New South Wales Greens and the AJP. And it was really led by Sue Higginson. She's calling the bill a thinly veiled gift to the gun lobby and wants the inquiry to scrutinise every claim made about conservation, culture, and community. So the submissions will open to the public, which they have, and hearings are expected over the coming months. So make sure you get on and you have your say. Make sure you spread this far and wide so that more people get involved and submit something. Personally, I think this inquiry is a really good thing, especially when of late that we've seen some positive steps forward in other states like Victoria and the Northern Territory. So if you're unaware of those, the Victorian government has recently announced a significant policy and that shift. So the National Parks Act is now going to permit seasonal deer hunting or stalking in the Snowy River National Park and Errinundra National Park. This decision opens up approximately 130,000 hectares of public land in East Gippsland to recreational deer stalking. This is a massive win. Well done to all involved. So let's talk about the policy details. So under these new amendments, seasonal deer stalking will be allowed in the designated areas of the two parks. Hunting is restricted to specific times of the year to balance recreational use and conservation efforts. Love it. Makes sense. Only accredited hunters holding a game license are permitted to participate. Great. The Snowy Rivers National Park is located in far eastern Victoria and encompasses some of the state's most rugged and remote landscapes, known for deep gorges, diverse forests, and iconic Snowy River. The park is a haven for biodiversity and outdoor enthusiasts alike. Giving access to hunters is awesome. Now, there are supporters of this, and they are hunting organisations, and they are hunters, and they are people that feel the environment is there for people to use. It's public land, and as the public, we should be able to use it. That makes sense. It contributes to well-being. It contributes to mental health. It brings economic benefits to those regional communities through increased tourism and spending that associated with that. However, we do have a lot of opponents, and they're conservation groups, the RSPCA, AJP. We know that there's an impact on native wildlife from individuals slowly walking through the bush. That's a risk of habitat disturbance. And it's a precedent that is setting up the use of protected areas in the future. Now, look, I feel there is a very big difference between destroying land and making it available to the public and it getting ruined, or one person or two people sneaking through the bush. I don't think that's disturbing habitat. It's funny that the same people are happy to bulldoze mass amounts of forests to go down the green energy policy. And we see what's happening with Snowy Hydro 2.0, that it's remarkably removing a lot of native bush to run whatever it needs to run, whether it be wires, whether it needs to be infrastructure to support green energy. It's sort of a bit of a contradiction in my opinion. All right, so the Hunting Conservation Bill specifically excludes national parks from being used for hunting. I don't understand why this was not put into the bill. I am with Dan from Shawmac Industries when he posted on Facebook saying that why on earth would any hunter or supporting political group not want to advocate that hunters should be able to access national parks? I don't get it. It makes no sense, especially when you have the Honourable John Ruddick from the Libertarian Party, who has been on my podcast and is previously calling for more access to national parks for all, including hunters. Now, there's also been a fair bit of Facebook hammering of John's decision to put this to an inquiry. However, maybe, just maybe, the provision of national park access might have been what pushed him into this decision. We know he's pro-gun as a libertarian and actually thinks that we should all have the right to carry guns, not be licensed. Interesting. On a further confusing note, no national park access, but as I mentioned before, suppressors have been thrown in for good measure. That doesn't make sense. Now, I really do think that suppressors are a pipe dream. I don't see this happening anytime soon. So it does make me wonder why they were put in and not national parks. This really does not make sense to me. I personally do have to commend the SFFP and Mr. Borsak in putting this bill forward. It is a step in the right direction. However, I do feel it might have been a bit rushed and could have been done better. It just seems to lack some of that evidence and data, and I'd like to refer to the extensive work that was done down in Victoria in support of duck hunting, where they got scientists in, they got data analysts in, and they went through all this and promoted a rock solid case as to why. This bill seems lacking of this in multiple areas, in my opinion. It doesn't seem to really strongly put forward this. And look, I really hope that that will occur in this inquiry, because then it's got the best chance of actually passing. Well, that's my thoughts on this, and I'd love to hear yours. So comment on Spotify or the video on YouTube. If you have enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. Until next time, bye for now.
You've been listening to the Australian Hunting and Beyond podcast with Matt. Thanks for tuning in and can't wait to catch you next time. But in the meantime, if you want more, you can find it at linktr.ee/Australian Hunting and Beyonds. That will give you our YouTube, Instagram, X, Facebook, you name it. We'll catch you next time.